destroy 99.9% of the species, all because human beings weren't behaving themselves properly. By contrast, Dr. Hogan believes in an arbitrary, bizarre, capricious world according to a private interpretation of a privately held book in which God creates the whole universe and then obliterates whole sections of it in a mad 300 days because of disputes with the behavior of human beings and so on. All right, now let's get to the evidence. The fossil record. If there were no fossil record at all, and yet evolution were still true. For example, if living creatures, when they died, just pulverized, and so they could not leave an imprint, then it would still be difficult to prove evolution, although there would be many other proofs. But still you would say, where's something concrete I can look at? One of the most striking things is that life has left this imprint from earlier creatures, and this has been known and studied in depth for over 200 years now. And the vastness of the fossil record, to those of you who don't waste your time on this stuff, may be surprising. There are over 80 billion fossils that have been discovered, and hundreds of millions that have been described, cataloged, placed in museum collections, assorted, organized by strata, organized by time, etc. This is not 5 or 6 fossils. This is not 12 fossils with a horse story or whatever. This is a massive record of past life, of creatures that are not here alive today, but were clearly alive at some point in the past. Now, how does Dr. Hogan deal with this? Well, according to him, we were all alive before the flood, but then along came the flood and wiped out all the ones that are found in the fossil record. Now that creates, in the flood, that creates a whole series of problems. For example, what's the size distribution of creatures as you go down geological strata? According to him, that's just all mud from the big flood, and they got killed, and they died, and they got fossilized in different layers. We know that the denser you are, and also separately, the heavier you are, the more you will tend to sink to the bottom. That's not the way the fossils are organized. The largest mammals are very recent, near the top layers. The heavy creatures, elephants, their relatives, etc., etc. Smaller mammals are lower down, even though we know smaller mammals are less dense and way less. It should not be in that order. So the size distribution is all. Secondly, dating. There are a whole series of methods, and this comes out of physics, chemistry, and so on, for dating rocks. Carbon-14 is one example. It works up to about 50,000 years ago. Argon, potassium is used if you want to go back a billion years. Now, Dr. Hogan is fond of pointing out inconsistencies in estimates. What he's done is gone and climbed around and found 20 estimates for carbon dating that are in contradiction. One says 3,000, the other says 30,000, even though one is the skin of the animal, the other is the bones of the same animal, and whatnot. But what he neglects to point out is that there are 50,000, 70,000 measurements of carbon dating. A whole world of consistent dating, which is in turn consistent with strata, older strata date to further in the past, etc. Now, scientists have a rule. If you have 50,000 observations in one direction and 5 in the other, you don't even pay attention to 5. If you have 50 or 100, you hardly pay attention to it. If you've got 50,000 in one direction and 5,000 in another, you've got a problem. You take it seriously and try to deal with the contradictions. So this is a fantasy on his part. There's no consistent series of dating that comes out of other disciplines in biology. There are minute details of the fossil record that are just absurd to imagine they resulted in one flood. For example, by our dating, scientists dating 70 million years ago, around the world, at strata that had the same kinds of creatures 70 million years ago, and date to 70 million years ago, you find a very thin layer of a chemical called iridium. And that's really dust. And what it is now believed is just a hypothesis at the time, but the evidence is growing to support it, is that came when a large meteor hit the Earth. It spewed up this iridium, which covered the Earth with it. It blotted out the sun for days and days and days. It was evolution. I'm all working in a particular area of evolutionary genetics now, and I've got to do my work. If you're going to get the water by raining 40 days and nights, it has to rain about 11 feet an hour. Remember, a minute an hour is a heavy downpour. 11 feet an hour would splat you to the ground as it hit you. Furthermore, and I didn't know this before debating this man the last time, it generates heat. The release of water in the atmosphere generates heat. That amount of water would result in water that came down at about 3,000 degrees temperature. So you've got a boiling mass of water. It's killing everything in the water, not just the fossils, but any other fish, etc., etc. How do humans survive that? I don't know. Well, last time he dodged that by saying, well, you'll find one little half a line, and I'm checking this in Genesis, where it talks about water gushing out from every corner. So now he wants the water not just to come down from above, but to come from down below. But we know that any water that does come up from below is superheated and comes up boiling already. The molten core of this planet is only about 5 kilometers below sea level. And the Earth gets very warm very quickly. Now, where did all that water come from? Where did it all vanish to? You can't have that amount of water. Water is so massive that it comes to the top of Mount Everest. Water that's 5 miles high, and then suddenly disappears in the space of less than a year, according to Genesis. Where'd it go to? Back up into the atmosphere, down to the rocks. It had to go somewhere. We got no evidence of it. Now, thirdly, the massive murder of the flood. Well, skip the murder of all the species that are no longer with us. You had millions of species that had to be without food for about a year. It's a fantasy to believe that Noah and his brethren were collecting all this food for all these species. The seawater would have been diluted so that you wouldn't have had seawater with all this rainwater coming down. A whole bunch of fish cannot survive unless it's really seawater, etc. Number 4, let me give you another absurdity. 80% of our parasites, roughly, that is our diseases, viruses, bacteria, protozoa, worms, live inside us. Now another 20% can also be found in a vector, like malaria can be in us or it can be in a mosquito. Now that means, and this is true for all other creatures, that when we got together, Noah got together 2 lions, 2 leopards, 2 gazelles, 2 kangaroos, 2 bears. Each of them had to be sick unto death. One of them had to have 40% at least of the species diseases, and the other had to have another 40%. And somehow there they are, ill-fed, ill-cared for, having to walk back to Australia with their kangaroo. Meanwhile, it's got half the parasites almost in their species. Nothing like we've ever seen since. And what about the incredible arrival and departure that's suggested by this? Remember when Noah's flood was invented as a story, people didn't know the earth was round. They knew the world a few